What's really interesting about the Etruscans is that several scholars, ancient and modern, speculated about their origins. And as a result of such studies, several theories developed. Today, we will try to focus and pinpoint the most probable theory, and we will uncover the truth through the usage of ancient sources, literary evidence, and recent DNA analysis. First and foremost, I would like to talk about the name proper, Etruscans. Now, this of course is in English, but what were they called by surrounding cultures, and what did they call themselves? In other words, what was the word to describe an Etruscan and the people, the Etruscans, in Latin, used by the Romans, in Greek, used by the Greeks, in Latin, Greek, and Umbrian? And the next affiliated question would be, but what did they call themselves? So we are in the presence of a differentiation between an exonym and an endonym. For those who don't know, an endonym is a name for a place or group that is used by the people who live there, while an exonym is a name used by outsiders for that same place or group. And we have a few examples here. Germany is an exonym, but Germans call their country Deutschland, so that would be the endonym. Likewise, Nihon would be the endonym used by the Japanese to refer to their countries, whereas Japan is the exonym. The ethnonym Etruscan comes from the exonym, so the external term used in several surrounding civilizations, not from the endonym or the original way in which the Etruscans called themselves. To be specific, in Latin, it would be found as Tusci or Etrusci, in Umbrian, Turscum, and in Greek, Tusernoi. However, the original name in their language would be something that sounded a bit like the word Rasenna. The name they used in their own language sounded probably something like Rasna, and it was used in fact by the Etruscans. The original name that was instead used by the Etruscans to refer to themselves was the word Rasna. However, this theory has been challenged, specifically by the famous linguist Helmut Rick, who tells us that both names, the one used in Latin and the one used in Etruscan, were in use by the Etruscans themselves, so they would both be endonyms. And the etymological origins of the word Etruscan or Tuscan would be connected with the word Tursis, which would mean a tower or a fortress. So, the people of the towers. The situation when it comes to the ethnogenesis is in fact quite complex, and even when just looking at classical antiquity and historians and writers of the period, well, the discussion of the origins of the Etruscans was already highly debated, and we have several theories expressed in the sources. We have the autochthonous or indigenous theory, whereby the Etruscans would be indigenous to Italy itself. We have the Eastern or Lydian origin theory, claiming that the original population and then will become the Etruscans was a migratory population originally from Western Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. We then have the Aegean theory, which was mostly pushed by ancient Greeks, who claimed a Greek origin of the Etruscans before they moved into the Italian peninsula. So let's review these one by one. Now, this idea that the Etruscans might have been Greeks is strongly connected to the writings of Hellanicus of Lesbos, who was an ancient Greek logographer, and when we use this word, we mean historiographers or chroniclers that precede the father of history, Herodotus, and of course all of their writings. According to him, the Etruscans were in fact the descendants of another people of Greek origin called Pelasgians. Now, we could go into the discussion of whether or not the Pelasgians, who would be probably more correctly indigenous inhabitants of the Aegean Sea, would be considered Greeks or not, isn't a video on its own. So for now, indigenous people of Greece is how we're going to discuss them. The overall idea behind the story is that these people were living or inhabiting the area of Thessaly, but they were kicked out by the other surrounding Greeks, and they ended up in the Italian peninsula through sea or navigation. Since we did mention Herodotus, what does the father of history say? Does he agree with this theory of Etruscan ethnogenesis proposed by his predecessor? No. Herodotus tells us that the Etruscans were in fact descendants of settlers coming from Lydia, a region of the Anatolian peninsula, modern-day Turkey, who had left their lands due to famine and relocated into central Italy, where they founded the first town. Then we have those writers, and I'm going to share three, who were proponents of the idea that the Etruscans were in fact indigenous of the Italian peninsula proper. And these would be Strabo, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, and Mircilio of Mytilene. Having discussed the ancient hypotheses, we should also briefly mention more modern ones. For instance, there is the theory presented by Emmanuel Rouget. Not this one, this is the one who makes wine. The Egyptologist from the 19th century, French Egyptologist, of course. According to his theory, the origins of the Etruscans would have to be connected to those that we usually call as the people of the sea, a very mysterious ethnonym that perhaps would require its own dedicated video, but in general it would be connected to the collapse of the Bronze Age. And separated from this one, still 19th and 20th century theorists proposed the idea of a north of Alpine or north of the Alps origin of the Etruscans, so definitely of a northern stem, although both of these are highly criticized and most likely they're nonsense. It is unfortunately difficult to say with certainty which of these hypotheses is correct, but we can say which one is the most probable, and that would be the thesis of an autochthonous origin or ancestral origin of the Egyptians to be connected to the Villanovan culture of 900 to 700 BC, central Italy. The Villanovan culture is the name of an Iron Age people who inhabited Etruria before the classical Etruscan civilization. Archaeological continuity in burial customs, pottery, and settlement patterns supports this theory. Moreover, this view suggests that the Etruscans emerged locally through a gradual process of cultural evolution influenced by Mediterranean trade and contacts with the Greeks and the Phoenicians. The Etruscans were expert metal workers, artisans, architects. They built elaborate necropolis with richly decorated tombs, developed city-states like Veii, Tarquinia, Cerveteri, and Clusium, and their religion deeply influenced Roman ritual practices, including augury and haruspicy, divination from animal entrails. And as we have mentioned on previous videos on this channel, the Etruscans even ruled over early Rome through a line of Etruscan kings, the so-called Tarquin dynasty, until the establishment of the Roman Republic in 509 BC. Recent genetic studies suggest that the Etruscans were genetically similar to other Italic peoples of the time, indicating local origins rather than a mass migration from the Near East. However, the Etruscan language still remains a mystery. It is a non-Indo-European language, unrelated to Latin or other Italic tongues, and its origins are still debated, with some linguists even believing that Etruscan is a survivor of pre-Indo-European languages once widespread in the Mediterranean. In other words, and this is the most fascinating aspect of all of this, the linguistic data alone kind of suggests that the Etruscans were a people that had been living in the Italian peninsula since before the arrival of all other Italic populations. Were the Etruscans the original Italians? Well, I'll leave you with that question, and if you have questions of your own, feel free to let me know in the comments below. And thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.